This is going viral on the 29th of September, 2021. From the East Coast and the West Coast, it's the movie show. And today we have Dennis Goldstein, Ken Aaron, Jim Dingeman, and Michael Jankowitz. And Michael is going to tell us. Michael, that was a really fun clip. It was hard to shut it down. Waiting, and we all know we're waiting to hear the the next song. Either it's not When You Were Jets. I don't know what it was.
No, it is the Jet song.
It's the Jet song, yeah. And so, what was your association with the movie? Just a fan, or were you participating, or what?
Well, I was, born and raised in New York City, so yeah, I could say for me, it's not just a film; it's my life. But of course, it is a stylized version of it. I think it's the greatest film, the greatest thing in the cinema, period. I think it's the best thing ever made. Of course, it has a pretty good starting point on Broadway when it was written for Broadway, and it had a rare combination of talents that created it. You just don't get that combination very often, if at all, which was Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim. Leonard Bernstein doing the music, Stephen Sondheim doing the lyrics, Arthur Lawrence writing the book, and Jerome Robbins doing the choreography and directing. And when they did the film, Robert Wise, who was slated, who was producing it, and who for United Artists, and who was going to direct it, thought it would be a better idea if he co-directed it with Jerome Robbins. And of course, Jerome Robbins was such a perfectionist that he was basically the studio insisted that he be fired about 2/3 of the way through, a little bit more than halfway through. But Robert Wise kept him on, particularly for the editing portion. So when they both deserved co-directing credits, but at that time, Robert Wise was considered one of the most artistic film directors around. He was shall we say, even though he had been directing, he worked as an editor with Orson Welles, both Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, and then he had directed some films earlier on, like The Setup, and which was highly acclaimed, smaller films. And even when he was given big budget films, he would always try to do something innovative and something on a higher artistic level. So the combination of directors for the film was also incredible. And again, since what we're talking about is who should play whom, how casting should be done, as far as whether or not people should be cast as the ethnicity they are, or if the character calls for it. When they cast the film, of course, they had to get the best dancers, the best singers, and for the lead roles, played by Natalie Wood and Richard Beamer, they could both sing, but they couldn't sing well enough for West Side Story, which was the highest level of musical theater, at least at that time, and still rates that category now, I think. So they had to even have them dubbed, but they tried to create the greatest, best possible version of West Side Story, and they succeeded, in my opinion. And they used something which when Wise was filming it, they used something which I like to call subjective realism, which is they filmed the city from the point of view of what the characters or people who lived in the city, how they would see it. That went down to the lighting and everything. I mean, when I watch the film now, I am thrown back to my childhood when that movie was made, because especially in that first portion, first 20 to 25 minutes, which was actually filmed on location on the streets of New York. And even when they did the sets, they made sure they had that subjective realism for the sets. Even when it was in LA, it still looked and sounded like New York to a New Yorker, to somebody who lived in that environment. I'm not talking about somebody who lived in Park Avenue necessarily. So this is a major achievement. For the casting, again, you needed the highest, you needed people who could sing, dance, and act. We saw that in the prologue. That was a good example of people who had to be multi-talented and at the highest level of each of those talents. So, of course, playing the shark, the Puerto Rican characters, at that time, particularly since it was very expensive to get dance lessons, etc., not all of the sharks were going to be Puerto Rican actors or Latino actors. And a big brouhaha has started only in recent years about that, the parts of Puerto Ricans should be played by Puerto Ricans or Latino, and the parts of the Jets should be played by Anglo, meaning the other ethnic groups, Irish, Jewish, Italian, whatever. The shall we say, second generation immigrant group. So what they did in the film is to highlight the differences, and also because they were, Wise and Robbins wanted to make a comment about racism, an anti-racist comment. So they made sure that they would darken they use a darker base on the makeup of the sharks and the shark girls, and they would use a lighter base on the makeup of the Jets. As a matter of fact, two of them, Elliot Feld and David Winters, who we saw there at that moment when they were, stealing the fruit, and then got confronted by from the push cart, and then got confronted by the sharks. Those two, David Winters and Elliot Feld, had their hair dyed blonde to highlight. I mean, they're both Jewish guys from. Well, I think David Winters was born in London, actually, but they were Jewish guys basically from New York. But they still dyed their hair blonde. So the idea was to play up that difference. Now it's come under criticism, mainly I think because Spielberg has made this, in my opinion, abortive remake, which I don't think can possibly come up to the level of the original or anywhere near it. But that's my opinion, obviously. But he insisted that was a mistake, that the Latino characters should be only played by Latino actors. He made sure they were all played by Latino actors. Now, in an environment when there are no parts for Latino actors, which there are fewer parts, you could say, well, we're not going to give away Latino parts to non-Latino actors. But that basic theory that characters should only be played by Latino, I think is particularly faulty because it's the wrong direction. What they
Okay, I got it.
Hey, let me just make that one point. I'll finish the sentence.
Go ahead.
Saying is that non-Latinos can play Latino characters, but Latinos should be all able to play non-Latino characters just as much, at least as much. And that is what I think we're discussing today. Okay,
very good. That's correct. I just want to ask you a question or two. What was the name of the actor who played the head of the Sharks? I forgot the character's name. Who?
George Chakiris.
Oh, George Chakiris. Okay. And the two white leads. There was the head of the Jets, and then there's Tony.
Tony was played by Richard Beamer, and Rip was played by
Tambourine. Russ Tambourine. Yeah.
Both
okay.
Started out as child actors, basically.
Okay, so the only one playing a Latino who wasn't was Natalie Wood.
No. Some of the Sharks were not Latino. George Chakiris is not Latino.
Oh, what is he?
He's of Greek descent.
Oh, okay.
And he had played Rip in the London version, the London stage version of West Side Story.
Which is the head of the Jets?
Head of the Jets, right.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, very good. I know what happened, what poison or illness did Steven Spielberg get to make him think he could do a second version of this?
Called hubris.
Yeah.
Or arrogance.
Maybe, I could see him taking a shot at it if he did the Jews versus the Goys or something, West Side Story, something like that. But to try to remake a classic like that, you know, I can think of, can you think of some movies where the remake was better? I can think of a few.
I can think of a couple, one or two. Mostly, more often than not, they're not better and they're not as good. But if you look at Ben-Hur, um, the original, the remake generally is considered better than the original. However, again, it goes down to the director. The director of the remake was William Wyler, who was an extremely good director. So, just as with Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins, the combination, when you get good, really good directors who surround themselves with really good, very good other artistically minded people, yeah, you can get a good remake, one that's equal to, if not better than the original. I don't think you can compare. I don't think Steven Spielberg is up to the same category as Robbins or Wise. He's a good entertainment director. He's a good popular. But the thing is that the director, if you get somebody really talented, the problem is Spielberg isn't up to that level. He certainly hasn't proven himself up nearly to either of the previous co-directors of the film. So, and second of all, the only new takes on it, he did some things. He changed the character of Doc, who was a elderly Jewish guy who was obviously a Jewish guy who was like a father figure to Tony, and he changed that to a Latino woman who was Doc's widow. It doesn't, and just so he can have a bigger part for Rita Moreno, who we wanted to bring on to give his remake legitimacy, which it didn't have much before. He brought on Tony Kushner to write the new screenplay. But the only thing he's done, I mean, which is, these are very talented people, obviously, but again, surrounding yourself with talented people helps, but it doesn't make you talented enough for a project like this. He did what most of the changes that have been made have been changes away from the original. So he takes the original work of West Side Story, the Broadway show, and they changed it as much as they had to for the film. But in Spielberg's case, they changed it as much as they wanted to. So from what I've heard, and that includes making sure that the Latino characters were only played by Latino.
Okay. 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 That's
so normally, I mean, if they're good enough, but the idea is his justification for doing it is moving more in towards segregation than integration, shall we say.
okay, great. So now I want to move forward on this. Unless anybody, Jim, do you have a comment on West Side Story? You sure you weren't in the chorus?
I do, but let Dennis lead first. Dennis, you want to
Dennis,
comment
go
on it?
ahead. Dennis, you got a comment?
Yes, I saw the original on Broadway,
The play.
the play,
Wow.
in 1957.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do you remember when, so you were closer to being a young man then, right?
I was very young.
Okay. Do you remember Bernstein's TV shows where, I forget the name of them, where he would have to, you know, explain music to the audience?
Vaguely.
Yeah, I do. I watched them. They're terrific.
Yeah, we all grew up with that. That's right. And I've actually found some old clips of him doing a rehearsal of West Side Story. It's really moving. And then for the aficionados there, Leonard Bernstein wrote an operetta called Trouble in Tahiti. Trouble in Tahiti. If you look it up, it's it's got many of the musical themes that are in West Side Story. It's very good. I don't want to start singing it, but I did use it for an audition. One of the songs I used for an audition to get into the High School Musical. One of the songs goes, There's a Law About Men. It's a really good song. He's a
Really?
great composer, great composer. No, I'm not going to do it.
Really,
But no,
you
no,
got
no,
it.
no, no,
Wait,
no.
wait, Kenny, you got into music and art as a voice student?
As a boy, pardon me?
You competed to get into music and art high school as a voice student?
It was in Brooklyn Tech.
Oh, Brooklyn Tech. Oh,
Oh,
I
wait
see.
a minute, hold it a minute. It must have been college.
Oh,
Wasn't
okay.
Brooklyn Tech, it was
Oh, okay.
college.
I thought,
City College.
okay, all right. Well, Dennis, do you have some more comments to make before I start unloading?
No, not really.
Okay.
Uh,
Now we
Mike,
go to
Mike,
Jim.
Mike has been
All
very
right,
helpful.
all right. I completely disagree with Michael. First of all, my family owned the first Spanish nightclub in New York City. And that was in the 1920s. My great uncle, Gran Tio, his name was Benito Collada. He was quite a character. The guy had fought with Pancho Villa, had been in Egypt, and then took the money he made and set up a nightclub in the village called El Chico. So what that was a nightclub that was sort of a pathbreaker because they were bringing Latin stars from Mexico, from the Caribbean, from Latin America, and from Spain, and giving them an outlet to be displayed as performers. And that was the first club like that in New York City. No clubs had ever allowed Puerto Ricans to perform before. Now, the question of typecasting is an interesting one. I'm looking at a report called the Latino Media Gap Report. And what it talks about is how, of course, Latinos, Hispanics are the fastest growing part of the American population and have tremendous buying power. We all of us live in parts of the country where this is very true. And they make several points about film. And I'm talking now about American media, not the growth of, because Mexico had a huge explosion of cinema right from the start, from the creation of cinema in the 20s and 30s. The golden age of Mexican cinema is 1930s and 1940s. And remember, in Latin America, we have this incredible tradition of soap operas, telenovelas, that have huge audiences throughout Latin America. So there's a whole media that is established in the 20s and 30s, and then, or when television arrives, it thrives. That has nothing to do with anything that we do in our own media outlets, either in television or film. Now, in terms of participation, Latino participation in films is extremely limited in the United States. In some cases, you look at how Latinos were shown in films. I give a good example. Like, let's look at the guy who plays the director in 42nd Street. He originally played Cisco Kid in the 1920s, and he was certainly not Mexican American. He sort of looked Latino. So Latin men basically are very, very insignificant in terms of their actual appearances in films and cinema in general. Then you have the question of content and audiences, the issues of stereotypes. Latinos are generally represented as criminals, law enforcers, cheap labor, etc. And this is sort of an issue that now rises to the point of questions of policy. Remember, who's that famous Mexican American comedian out in California, who's a brilliant comedian?
There are several.
Well, who did a TV show. It was quite funny to watch. He played
Lopez?
well, he was a real crazy guy. He played a Mexican American middle class family, and it was sort of like All in the Family Mexican American style, based in Los Angeles. But it was nutty. But essentially, Latinos have extremely low participation in American media thing. So I think that Michael is wrong about Spielberg deciding to cast everybody in the roles in this version of West Side Story as being Latino and being Hispanic actors and actresses. There's plenty of talented people. And remember, people are generations away from West Side Story. West Side Story itself was an amazing fantasy. It was a fantasy based on, all of us grew up in New York. We remember the gangs. We remember the juvenile delinquent issues. We remember all those kind of things. I grew up a few blocks away from where the famous vampire killing occurred, over there in Lower Manhattan, where the guy the guy had a cape and a umbrella, and he killed 2 people in a playground not so far away from where I was growing up as a kid. So, gangs were reality in my lifetime, as it was for everybody in the city. And of course, this movie is an incredible fantasy about that. And but getting back to this question of casting, I do think that there is a role, and a role of empowerment in many cases, to have Hispanic, African American actors. Asian American actors are also stereotyped and categorized. How many films do we see based on their lives, etc.? And these are kind of things that these are issues we've seen being argued about since the 1960s in American culture. So, as we argued about this yesterday, my problem is that we don't have a good federal policy or state policy to really bountifully finance the arts, many times more than it is, to give jobs and space for people in all sorts of different media. But look what just happened at the Met. The Met just, for the first time ever, had an all-black opera performed in its history. 180, ever since it was formed. So, it's one has to, the issue of casting is an interesting one, but then of course you have the question of how casting was done beforehand. And, we can talk about that. Westerns, movies that would cast ethnic people, ethnic stereotypes, etc., throughout Hollywood's history. So sometimes I think one has to think about the questions of fairness and equity these days. Anyway, that's enough. We can argue from there.
Okay,
Well,
thanks, Jim. Let's go back to Michael. Go ahead for rebuttal.
First of all, what I'm talking about is not that Latinos, there should be more parts for Latino actors. I think there should be far more opportunity for Latino actors. So if you're doing West Side Story and you wanted to be equitable, then what you would do is you would cast, yes, you could cast some of the Sharks with non-Latino actors, but you could cast some of the Jets with Latino actors. In other words, as an actor myself, no actor wants to say, oh, you can only play your ethnic type, your national type, your whatever. You can only play something that is closer to you. That's not how I was trained as an actor by Stella Adler. The idea is to play somebody other than yourself, different from yourself, and to play that as accurately and realistically as possible. Now, I believe that the Sharks, and for all we know, I mean, possibly in the film and certainly in other productions, some of the Jets, some of the people playing the Jets could have been Latino or of at least part Latino descent. But I think the direction we're moving in is just saying, well, we're going to, you think you're going to create more roles for Latino actors by only casting those roles that already exist, those Latino roles that already exist with Latino actors. You're not. You're reaching a brick wall then. You have to increase how many characters that are Latino, and I should say, you have to let Latino actors break through the stereotyping and say, okay, I can, in other words, we can cast them as the Jets. If we're going to cast non-Latinos as the Sharks, as some of the Sharks, then we can cast Latinos as some of the Jets.
Okay, we got that the first time, and now we got it solidly the second time. I got it, really got it. I want to make a comment and I want to go on. The point is art and convincing the audience, getting the audience to agree that they're experiencing something. In terms of Latinos in the media and in dramatic or media, TV and movies and stage. There's lots of Latino shows. There's several Latino shows. Jim talked about one. There's one my wife watches all the time. George Lopez, I think is his name. Of course, there was Something in the Man. You know, there was the Latinos.
Chico and the Man.
Chico and the Man. Chico and the Man, and also this is the point. There are Latinos in Law and Order, or CSI, or various cop shows, or other dramatic shows, or other dramatic movies. There was a Latino part, very strong Latino part of, pretty sure I consider her a Latino lesbian in Aliens, in the sci-fi movies, or apocalyptic, dystopian movies, or dramatic movies. Or there were Latino parts. Well, Spain is, Spanish parts are different than Latino. We're talking about South American. Not that many movies about South America, but I'm thinking of movies about The Big Gun, with Gregory Peck, and it's mostly Italians. And I just want to, okay, so I want to move on in the same space. I want to go with an Anglo playing the part of an American Indian. And I want to start that with Jim Thorpe. And that's Burt Lancaster, because he was in 2 movies where he played the part of an Indian. And let me go back here and get this one part. Jim Thorpe was, let me share this. When I share this, it should knock you out.
All right, but I just want to just show this, that
Yeah.
here are shows that are played by leads that are Latin. And as you can see, I Love Lucy is the first one in the 50s. And then we have all these different shows
Right.
up to Desperate Housewives in the 2010s.
Yeah.
But yeah, Chico and the Man, George Lopez, of course, is hilarious. But just to show the point about the lack of the leads. But anyway, yeah, I'll stop.
And it was, Burt Lancaster was in 2 movies where he played an Indian. And one of them was Jim Thorpe. And I think that came, I don't know if that was before or after he played Apache. But Jim Thorpe was an American Indian who became a football hero. And there's a little scene of that. I guess you see it. There he goes. He got the ball. And he's going to run it. And then, look, there we go, old-time football. And I have a friend who's living in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Here's that one. And then Michael was talking about this yesterday. He also played an Apache, or one of the last Apaches. Wasn't it Apache, not a Comanche?
It was
called Apache. Yeah, so there's 2. Now, I think he was a very popular star. Everybody loves Burt Lancaster. And he was a very liberal. He had to stop sharing. I think my machine is starting to choke. So I'll keep talking here until it stops sharing. But, the other people like that, which I can't bring up, I've got a great shot of Laurence Olivier playing Othello. And at the time, that was very controversial. It's a question about what, of course, Paul Robeson did it too. But they may not have had enough black box office actors to play Othello, because you want to draw the audience in. And I have to say, I think most people are drawn to a movie, maybe by the content, because they want to see a spy movie or sci-fi, but also mostly because they like the actor or they like the director, and that's what they're going to see. So when you're producing a film, at least in the Western society, you're looking at box office. In Eastern Europe, when they produce movies, all funded by the government, so they shoot the film and then they say, does anybody want to see this? It's just backwards to what happens in the States. The state starts from top down. Who's going to see the movie? Now we write a script, and who are we going to hire to play these parts?
No, that's not entirely true.
So Burt Lancaster is a big draw. Burt Lancaster, and of course, Kirk Douglas at the time.
All right, Kenny, I'd like to correct that. The East Germans.
Could you go?
The East Germans were into making what we would consider politically correct Western films.
Go ahead.
and
Go ahead, go ahead.
they were very much into. Now remember, they had this whole tradition based on you know, the who's that great popular novel that they would write about, Iron Hand or something like that. There was a popular novel that was very prevalent in German countries about the Old West. But the East Germans took that tradition and made essentially, like, you know, the white man is a genocidal maniac type of films conquering the Native Americans. And that was the films the East Germans did. And they're sort of amazing films. They're still preserved. I think they have a whole bunch of them up at UMass, and they produced them as a sort of historical relic. But they're fascinating to watch because they were exported all around the third world to be seen. So, you know, the issue of how different societies portrayed the Indians, or this issue in American history of the conflicts between settlers, white settlers, and Native Americans differs historically around the world. And that also gets into these questions of who plays who. Somebody like Jim Thorpe, like that would be right to have a really good Native American actor who has tremendous athletic skills to play Jim Thorpe, because what a great character he was. And, you know, and I would say, you know, if we have to look at the HBO, the HBOs, the Showtimes, they have been much bolder in doing casting, which is much more, you know, let's say using Native Americans. So, for example, they do a big version of the book "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee." They do a really excellent historical costume drama on the Plains Indians up to Wounded Knee. And everybody in that cast is Native American who plays in that cast. So, you know, things have progressed, but I'll go on.
Actually, Ken, what I would like to say is, again, I'll get to my pet peeve in a second, but the idea is that I know plenty of First Nations actors, Native American or Aboriginal Canadian. I know plenty of them, and they're all, the ones I know are very good actors. And they, you know, a lot of them just don't want to be playing, don't want to be limited to Native American parts. They want to play other things. And that's where I have, you know, the big problem with the stereotyping. But my biggest problem, and it, as it always has been, is not necessarily with the casting. And of course, you should have, it's probably easier to have a Native American actor playing a Native American because they have less work to do. But it's not that. So if Burt Lancaster plays a part, that's fine. My problem with American films and Native Americans is that they constantly, well, when I say constantly, for the most part, most of the big films that claim to be about the Native American experience, something, the lead character, the main character, is a white man. He could be a white man raised by Native Americans. He could be a white man who befriends them. But there seems to be a problem in this country with having a character. And ironically, the two Burt Lancaster movies you mentioned, the lead character is Native American. It's one of the more the exceptions than the rules. But most of the time, they say they're doing a movie about Native Americans and forgetting about the casting, the characters, the lead character is not Native American. So it's kind of this kind of patronizing type of thing where, oh, the benevolent white man, or the white man who was raised by Indians, so to speak, as the public relations stuff would go, but the white man is the one who helps, who leads the Indians, or something like that. This I consider is just playing into American racism. I'm just fed up with that. If I go to see a movie about Native Americans, First Nations peoples, I want the main characters, the lead characters, to be First Nations people. I don't want them to be white men, you know, the great white Bwana who's coming to help them out. And I also should say, we lost Ken. Jim?
Really, we lost Ken. Well, he'll be
Yeah.
back in a minute. Dennis, why don't you chime in? What do you think about all this? Dennis?
Dennis?
Yeah, you chime in, man. Just unmute, Dennis.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go on.
You can hear me now. Okay. Um, what I think is America is a white supremacist culture, basically, and you have to start out at the beginning of and Hollywood is just part of America. So every group had to fight their way into getting parts in Hollywood. That's what I would say. And it's one group after another has had to fight their way into being accepted in America. And blacks have still not done it. They still, well, some of them are accepted, but uh, the problem, I'll say it once more, the problem we have is we're a white supremacist society, basically. And everybody has to fight against that if you're other than white. And it was more than that at the beginning. It was different ethnic groups from Europe had to fight too, like Jews, Italians, Polish, Irish. Uh, so there's always been a lot of discrimination, and that's what we're up against as a society. I'll leave it at that.
All right.
Welcome.
I'm back now. I was off. I got knocked off. I don't know what you saw, but
No.
what are we talking about right now?
We're talking about the Native American issue.
Yeah, okay. So in that, we were talking, I don't know if we talked about this yesterday, The Last of the Mohicans with Daniel Day-Lewis.
Right.
And Eric Mann, I think, was the guy, the director, something like that. It was an incredible movie, I thought. And I thought those were all actual American Indians playing the parts. It's very moving, you know.
I'm not sure. I know Wes Studi, of course, plays a prominent role in that movie. And then we were talking yesterday about Russell Means. Russell Means was in Last of the Mohicans also. And Natural Born Killers, which is a very different film. And then someone like Will Sampson. People remember him. He was Chief Bromdom in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And then he was in The Outlaw Josie Wales, which is sort of a weird film. That's sort of a weird 60s kind of film, because Clint Eastwood assembles this rainbow coalition to fight in the movie. And then, of course, Floyd Westerman, who was also a famous Native American actor. But again, I agree with you, Mike, on the question of being cast and stereotyped and put in these roles. Because, I remember yesterday when we were talking about this before we were recording this today, Richard Pena, who was the director of the Lincoln Film Center, Film Society at the time, organized the first Native American Film Festival. He got some money. And, what I learned from all the directors and Native American actors was, there's no real, it's like they got the money out of the thin air to do this, and to actually put them in a sustained situation where they're working together. These guys have had to, do all these kind of hoops. They have lots of projects set up. Canada, in particular, was much more supportive of the United States about these kind of questions in terms of their indigenous film directors. And there was a woman who was a Mohawk she did a documentary about the Mohawk struggles up there in Upper New York State on the border with Canada. That question would lead us to another issue and that is in terms of Black Americans and the way Blacks are depicted in films. It's really only in the past 20 or 30 years that we can say that there have been, I mean, any kind of films that are powerful talking about the period of slavery. I mean, in any kind of realistic way. I mean, at least in the United States. And there's so much rich stories to talk about. I mean, no one's done a biopic of Frederick Douglass. My God, what a great figure he would be to do a film about. Or W.B. Du Bois. I mean, there's so many figures that one could do. But then the question is, in terms of white actors versus black actors, you and I both know, I think it's great to read plays. I have no problem with reading out loud a play by a famous African-American playwright. I think that's important for one to learn and understand that. And whether it should be performed, cross-culturally, well, that's how fucked up America is, because we have such boundaries in our heads about these kind of things aesthetically that you probably couldn't get that done these days, again, for the reasons that a lot of black artists are not well represented in, if you look at percentage wise, even though it's changed, there still is that problem in Hollywood. You always hear that people complain about the Oscars in that regard. And anybody who's ever read about how the Oscar process is, certainly up to maybe 2 decades ago, it was dominated by the World War II generation. So, these are serious issues. And then the question becomes, how do, people then will generalize about, people draw their understanding of self and history and their self-knowledge from how these depictions in Hollywood are made. And, I have my problems with that argument, but, maybe for some it's true. When they go see history depicted in the cinema, that's what they think history is, or that's what they think their self-image is. And so you always have these constant fights that have been going on since the 60s. Robeson led these fights in the 20s and 30s, trying to break through these kind of stereotypes. And remember, when D.W. Griffith does Birth of a Nation, there's a huge reaction from African Americans around the country attacking the film. One of the big leaders attacking Birth of a Nation as a stereotype film is the son of a Civil War veteran. So, these issues have been around in American society for decades.
Okay, Jim, I got to ask you a question. What should be the policy? Should it be a federal policy or something from the unions or the Academy of Motion Pictures, that they should set a quota based on the current demographics of the country, or try to make amends? Or should they, in fact, they did add that to the categorization of what can be nominated. They put in political considerations and diversity considerations into who can be nominated for Academy Awards. I'm just saying this off the top of my head. I didn't pull it up, but I remember they did do that. You think that's appropriate? So that's like where some people would complain, sports is sports, it's not politics. And now this is movies, and it's not that people, there's at least 5 political movies made every year about some scandal or corruption or pharmaceutical issue or prison or corrupt cops. There's lots of political movies made every year, but there's no quota, there's no government intervention, and there should be no, lobbyist intervention. But of course, there's lobbyist interventions. We've had this whole incursion into the media from China, where certain scenes are reshot for the Chinese audience, and certain things can't be done, and China's using its influence because they're bankrolling the movies. So that's a corporate world influencing them. So Jim, do you think there should be, what do you think about, could somebody pull that up? Motion Picture Academy qualification requirements for Academy Awards. And we can talk about that. But Jim, I want to know, you're talking about the problem and we should do something about it. What do you suggest?
Well, again, look, whenever I've talked to friends of mine who I have a friend who was a professional script doctor. He would be flown in to rewrite scripts. His wife did the scripts for some major Hollywood successful, but both of them did that. And it's all about money. I mean, really, I mean, one has to, see, that's where, all the vision bullshit, all the value bullshit, it's what's going to make a lot of money. And because Hollywood's a business. And in terms of the Chinese market, the Chinese, of course, like I think we've talked about this, Michael and I've talked about this in other contexts, their biggest hit during the pandemic was, and they made, I think it made almost $900 million, was a movie about a battle in 1937 in Shanghai. And, it was like, it made like $900 million. And so the Chinese market is now taken on its own. It's off on its own. Remember, they're sort of playing these games, restricting. They've been increasingly doing joint ventures with the U.S. and European companies. So they're pulling their weight around. Now the question of quotas, I don't believe in quotas.
Okay, let me interrupt. Let me interrupt you a second because I got that reference now. This is from September 9th, and it's from Vox.com. So it's a summary. 3 rules that were added to the Oscars. At least one, quote, lead or significant supporting actor, quote, unquote, from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group, or I'm not seeing the rest of it. 2, at least 30% of a cast in secondary and minor roles from 2 underrepresented identity groups. 3rd rule, a main storyline or subject that centers on an underrepresented identity group. Now, an identity group obviously is not just racial. It could be handicapped or gender divergent or whatever the common parlance is for underrepresented identity groups. So, I'm sure I fall into one of them. So, but they're putting in what I would consider political issues.
Right.
And
right.
you just brought up a charge about China.
Yeah. Look, I just put up the industry's monitoring of box office sales around the United States.
Whoa.
That's what they think about. Box Office Mojo. Okay. So these are, whenever you want to really figure out how a movie is doing and how it really works and all that, this is what's important, to see how much money they're making. And, look at the lead this week is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Rings.
Right.
And all these other films, look at, okay, Don't Breath to Bayou, Respect, not doing that well. I thought it was a great film. And these are the major films making money right now. So if I'm sitting there guiding a studio, and you can see Walt Disney, Universal, 20th Century Fox, MGM, etc., this is what you're looking at to see what the public likes. So all this other stuff I think is important. And remember, they had a big fight about Star Wars because someone was saying, "Oh my God, you're making politically correct Star Wars. You have every single ethnicity, every single racial group in the mix." Now, science fiction, I think, allows you to do that kind of stuff because you can do whatever the hell you want. You can have a little 10-year-old kid born in Cambodia who can fly around the moon in like 10 seconds. I mean, it doesn't matter, because I think that's I think one of the interesting aspects of Hollywood and what makes money, because science fiction, of course, is open to pansexual, pan-racial, trans, every goddamn thing in the world you could have in there. Transgender, you can have creatures that are transgender, transsexual, uni this, uni that. So that's another aspect about looking at how they use science fiction to sort of experiment with all these kind of things. I know that they've gotten a lot of pressure from below, because remember, what's that great satire on Hollywood that a black director did, Michael, about 30 years ago? There was a black director who did a brilliant satire about a black, what?
You're talking about
Black.
Spike Lee?
No. Before Spike Lee, there was
The Wayans brothers,
No,
the ones who,
before the Wayans brothers, there was a great satire done about how a black producer breaks into Hollywood. And it was I think it was a movie done in the 70s or early 80s. It was a brilliant satire. And the guy got it funded because he basically was saying, look, this is how ridiculous it is. He was showing how difficult it was for a black producer or a black director to break in. And I listened to so many black actor friends of mine complain about their experiences in Los Angeles, their experiences in New York. Some of them would go to Europe to work because they had a better time working in the French or British or Dutch. I had two friends who worked in the Dutch TV system. So, these issues I think are very real. And again, as far as I'm concerned with us in the United States, it is because we have such a poorly funded and robust commitment to the arts fiscally at the national, state, and local level. I think we had a much more expansive attitude towards that, and not blinded with issues like white supremacy, white racism, etc. It'd be a hell of a lot better. We'd be doing greater stuff.
Okay, I want to bring up two things.
Ken.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did want to say one thing because I think Dennis hit it on the head when he said we live in a white supremacist society.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the problem. That is the main part of the problem, I think. Hollywood played into that white supremacy for decades and decades, and is still to some degree at least playing into it. And one example of that, I mean, that of course that happened with Native Americans, obviously. But again, it's still playing into it with Native Americans by having these great white bwanas in these supposedly movies about Native Americans. But one example is in the early 60s, people were talking about a breakthrough film on civil rights as To Kill a Mockingbird, in which a white man defends a black man. I mean, the African American parts were, I thought, some of them were very stereotypical and relegated to not even major supporting roles in most of the cases. And they were saying, "Oh, that's the great civil rights movie." But the great civil rights movie of the early 60s, if you want to talk about as far as how popular it was and the impact it made, was A Raisin in the Sun, in which all the characters were African, and it was about an African American. It was about an African American family, and had incredibly powerful performances. Many of whom became stars. I mean, Sidney Poitier already was a star, but you had, and people cite To Kill a Mockingbird as being the civil rights movie, but that wasn't it. That was about a white man who defends black men. But the movie about black men and black women who were living in this society was A Raisin in the Sun, which of course was based on an incredible play by an incredible playwright. But the fact is that you have this situation where it is a white supremacist society, and as long as it is that, that's why when you have a film like West Side Story, which kind of busts through that, or A Raisin in the Sun, or something like that, and says, you know something, yeah, we're taking a risk on making a profit, but we've got to bust through this thing. We have to break through this white supremacist wall.
Okay, I got it. You got it. That's a good point to end it. Break through the wall. Got it.
All right, but see, there's something you're wrong about, Michael, and that is that look, the To Kill a Mockingbird. You're of course, Raisin in the Sun is a superior work of art. However, Harper Lee's novel, when it's published in 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird, it wins the Pulitzer Prize. Now, yes, it has a certain image of portraying the civil rights struggle, because now, for example, they had big fights over having statues to Atticus Finch down in Alabama, because it was such a popular novel internationally. Harper Lee won the Pulitzer Prize for that novel. They sit there and attack now Atticus Finch as essentially along the lines of what you just said, essentially this paternalistic white racist image of, do-gooder for the poor. is that relevant to us today? But nevertheless, that was sort of an interesting sort of pathos of a time that really had an impact, much more than to say that Lorraine Hansberry should not be underestimated for that brilliant play she wrote. But certainly I would say that To Kill a Mockingbird had far greater influence, whether we like it or not.
But that's what's wrong with the society. In other words, the society won't, in order for this society, American society, to accept something about civil rights, it has to have be from the point of view of white America. So the white person, the good white person who is fighting racism, but they don't seem to accept it from the point of view of the group, be it Black or Latino or First Nations.
Okay. Okay, you feel that there's something wrong with America. That's fine. We got to get another audience. Like Stalin said, if you can't get the public to do what you want, get another public. Send them all to the Gulag or to Siberia and just raise some new people. No. You're saying the American people are racist.
The American people need to evolve.
Okay, great. Congratulations. That's true for all of us. I think that's correct. I wanted to show you, I want to move on here a little bit. That's a picture of the different people who played Charlie Chan over the years. And we can see that there's, about 3 or 4 of them that are actually Asian. But the most part of it, they were, I don't know where Werner Oland came from or Sidney Toller, but they're not Asian. And but we got Carol Nash and Peter Ustinov, which we know from other parts of their career. And of course, Ross Martin, who was famous for the Wild Wild West. I just want to show you, this is what they had in Hollywood, where they had non-Chinese people playing Chinese parts. And I had another one. Let me see if I can get that other. I think, I thought I had it. Oh, there it is. This is one of the funnier ones. And let's see if that shows up. I think so, right?
Well, that's how he died.
That's how he died. Yeah, because they did it in a. They did it.
He did it.
Yeah, radiation.
That's right, radiation.
So, but it was always, it was very, one of the classic worst casting parts of all time. And well, then, yeah, go ahead.
But that didn't help. However, what you see there is where you see non-Asians playing Asians being cast as Asians.
Right.
And by the way, as a matter of fact, in one of the worst, shall we say, the greatest transgressors as far as stereotyping and everything like that, John Ford, who was terrible in his portrayal of First Nations people and the whole issue. When he finally did Cheyenne Autumn, by the way, most of the characters playing Native Americans, playing Cheyenne, were Latino, including Ricardo Montalban, Dolores Del Rio, Sal Mineo, of course, is Italian American from the Bronx. But the fact is that, and again, but if they're actors, if they're good enough to do it, fine. The problem is, would we just showed Charlie, you just showed Charlie Chan. Now, can an Asian actor, if a white actor can play Charlie Chan, then can an Asian actor play Wild Bill Hickok or something?
Well, it's up to the makeup. We had Brando. Didn't Brando play a Japanese character in some movie? I remember seeing him with eye makeup. What was it called? Tea House of the August Moon, right? And I understand what you're saying. I think from the viewpoint of the producer and the director, if they can pull it off, if the audience buys it, it's a done deal. You have a very competent actor now named Oscar Isaac. I'm not sure where he comes from, but he's been playing all kinds of ethnicities. And you also had Jimmy Smith playing a Latino officer in some LAPD show or whatever, cop show. And he's really from, I think he's from Indonesia or Sri Lanka. He's not a Latino, but he looks like a Latino. So, and you have The Rock. The Rock is also, people are not sure where he comes from. but he just plays male leads all the time. Nobody pays any attention to what his ethnicity is. I think he's Hawaiian, I'm not sure. But it doesn't matter, nobody really cares. I put up a clip here of Lawrence of Arabia because you had Alec Guinness. Can you see this? I guess so. Alec Guinness and Anthony Quinn playing Arabs. Anthony Quinn was the head of a Bedouin tribe, and Alec Guinness was Farouk, I think. I'm not sure Omar Sharif if he's Egyptian, but he was playing with Saudi Arabia. And of course, Peter O'Toole pretended to be an Englishman, but that wasn't much of a stretch for him. And then now this one is very important. Let me see if I can get this up here. This is an incredible movie directed by Mel Gibson. Here we go. This is an amazing movie with no Anglos and nothing but Mexican Americans. Has anybody seen the movie Apocalypto?
Yeah, a terrific film.
I saw Apocalypto on television.
Yeah, and it was shocking, and it was completely engrossing. It was very sparse on dialogue. That's one of the reasons it worked. But it was completely an indigenous population cast. So yeah, I thought that movie, well, you know, if you haven't seen it, see it. An incredibly good movie, and it was a little bit derivative of a movie which was made by Cornell Wilde called The Naked Runner, because there was a scene in there. And the Cornell Wilde film is very much like what Mike is talking about. Oh, we're going to do an African safari movie. So they have the white Bwana, you know, the white the guide or hunter, head of the safari, and they're captured by a cannibal tribe. And 2 or 3 of the party gets eaten, but they get Cornell Wilde, they give them a chance to run and become a target. And that concept of people hunting people is, there must have been about 10 or 15 movies like that. One comes out every about 2 or 3 years. But, you know, he runs, he's got nothing, he's naked, but he survives and he makes it back to the fort. And it's a movie about Africa, but it's all about the white, I forget what the name of it is. You know, the man, he's the man, Clark Gable or Stuart Granger or Cornell Wilde, etc. And the exception to that is this movie Apocalypto, where the only white people are the Spaniards, and you don't see them, they're just in a boat that comes to the shores near the end of the movie. So maybe you see them walking on the beach, but the rest of the movie is all indigenous characters, people, population, with their culture, their tribe, their dress. A beautiful movie. Just had an unfortunate publicity event where the director, Mel Gibson, had too much to drink and got recorded with some profanities about certain ethnicities. It's as polite as I could say. But he's done some really good work despite all of that.
You know what they say, Ken?
Okay, so I'm off. I mean, he did a movie. He did a very ethnic movie about the Bruce of Scotland. Anybody, any comments on Apocalypto?
Well, I can only say that as far as Mel Gibson getting drunk, when you get drunk, you know, very often you say what you really think rather than what you say when you're more censoring yourself when you're sober. But Mel Gibson, I'm not a big fan of Mel Gibson anyway. He you might call theater of the obvious, and there always seems to be a little underlying racism in his films. I did not see all. I just saw a couple of clips from Apocalypto, so I won't comment on that. And I'll take your word for it on what you just commented. But I think one of the things that I found, I mean, when I was young, I you know, you mentioned Tea House of the August Moon and Marlon Brando playing an Okinawan character. But what I like, first of all, I like seeing actors who are not that ethnicity play that ethnicity, because that would mean that if they're really good actors, they're doing their job well, then they, at least that one actor, is developing a sensitivity to that ethnicity. So to just use another example, when Ingrid Bergman played Golda Meir, where you could say, well, probably then Ingrid Bergman is an anti-Semitic. When somebody plays a Latino character and they play them sympathetically and realistically, then you can say, well, that actor, you know, you have a little bit more confidence in that actor being, you know, there's more of a chance they're not racist. But the thing is that to see these characters, when I was younger and I saw, and you know, a lot of the films that prompted me to become an actor, and plays. I mean, in the Fantastics, the lead character, the main character, is Mexican. Of course, that's a play, not a film. But in Tea House of the August Moon, which is also a play, the lead character is Okinawa. I got a kick out of that. I didn't want to see the lead character being the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant American. I wanted to see the lead character be somebody who has not been well represented or represented enough. And I wanted to see more of that. And to me, it's a matter of making sure once you have those characters and you have enough Latino characters, enough Native American characters, enough Asian characters who are main characters, not stereotypes, not supporting stereotypes. But when you have these main characters, and on top of it, then you say to the actors who are Latino, Asian, Native American, yes, we might not cast you in that role, but we will cast you in other lead roles, which are not necessarily of your ethnicity. Then we get into more of a, for lack of a better term, we're bringing people together, and bringing people to realize and respect and relate to each other's ethnicity. And we're also expanding and concentrating on those ethnicities because we are creating large and significant and well-developed and realistic and starring roles, starring characters for those ethnicities. And that is a direction, I think, both those directions, I think, is where we should be moving. Okay.
All right, I wanted to talk about Apocalypto and The Naked Prey. I love The Naked Prey. I saw that movie twice when it was opened in 1965. And, you know, particularly because it was shot in Rhodesia, it was shot in Zimbabwe. The people pursuing him are Ndebele's. They're basically Zulus, because the Ndebele was the breakaway from the Zulu nation that conquered the southern part of Rhodesia in the middle of the 19th century during what they call the Mefakani. Now, what's interesting about the story of The Naked Prey is it's based on a story that comes from the Old West of the United States. It's based on an 1809 story from a person who was part of Lewis and Clark's expedition. And the guy is captured by Blackfeet Indians. And he is pursued naked. And he's being chased by Blackfeet Indians. And all the other Blackfeet Indians basically stop pursuing him, except one guy. So he turns around and kills the guy, takes his stuff, and that's how he survives. Now, The Naked Prey, Cornell Wilde, who's actually quite an interesting actor and director in cinema, he does one of the best war movies ever made, Beach Red. Later on in '67, sort of an allegory about the Vietnam War. But he...
what movie was that? What movie was that?
Beach Red. Beach Red. It's about a Marine operation, World War II.
Okay.
But, you know, but again, look at these motifs. They're taking from the West. They're taking from, you know, because all the guys in that party in Naked Prey, boy, the Africans who captured them, you know, completely fucked them up. I mean, one guy's tied to a snake that bites him and kills him. Another guy's chopped up. It's just an amazing, brutal death. And so you sort of feel like, holy shit, you got to get out of there. And so that was an amazing film to watch as a teenager. I watched it as a teenager. But those kind of films, there's this bridge occurring in the 60s where these movies are still being made. You still had a movie like Zulu being made that was the biggest draw in the Commonwealth when it came out. Still one of the great action movies in 1964. And guess that movie is done by a exiled, blacklisted Hollywood writer. All right, that's directed and written by that kind of person. It's about, of course, the Battle of Roach Cliffs in 1879. But it's the first great feature, I believe, of Michael Caine. But it was these kind of films were still being made, glorifying empire. Remember, they make that movie Cartoon with Charlton Heston. I mean, you know, there's a market for these movies out there, and it's so interesting because one time I met somebody who was a Lakota. He now teaches. He was at Yale. He was a dean of a college at Yale, full-blooded Lakota. He now teaches out in the West, but his dissertation was on Italian spaghetti westerns. And his whole argument about Italian and spaghetti westerns is that we have a very poor understanding about the fulsome reach of them, because there was a whole bunch of scripts of Italian spaghetti westerns that are done by directors who were associated. For example, Solanas, who's associated with the movie Battle of Algiers, who helped the Pontecorvo do the film. He was writing anti-imperialist cowboy movies that are being marketed to the third world in the 60s and 70s and making a ton of money. And there's a whole genre of Italian spaghetti westerns we don't even appreciate that are and if you look at the Italian spaghetti westerns, we do see they're very different in how they're presenting the West. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, all those kind of films that were done. But then beyond that, so the images and stereotypes, I believe, get shaken up in the 60s, and by the 70s, they're rattled all over the goddamn place.
Sorry, well, I wanted to ask Jim, because we're going to end the show here, but so Jim's going to have the last word, and then I'm going to put one more still. What do you think about the consideration that the politics of the director or the producer or the actor have any weight at all in the product of the film as it's viewed in a theater by the audience? Do you think that that's valid or invalid?
I'll tell you, it's really, you know, I personally like James Woods. I always have. But James Woods, I interviewed James Woods when he was with Oliver Stone at Lincoln Center. And it turns out James Woods was trying to make a movie about that crazy incident that had Sharpton in it. You guys can remind me. That woman, Tawana Brawley affair. He was obsessed with making a movie about the Tawana Brawley affair. And here was a guy who obviously was a coke buddy of Oliver Stone's. I mean, you know, like Woods was a complete speed freak. And I believe one of the great American actors of that period. I always felt he should have gotten I felt Salvador should have gotten the Academy Award that year when it came out. To me, it was the best American movie. Yet here he is, a right-wing guy, and his career was sunk,
Right.
which I felt was unfair. And he was blatant about his support for Trump. And he's sitting there next to Oliver Stone, and Oliver Stone has his fucking grin on his face as Woods is bragging to me about how he thinks Trump is great. And by then we'd gotten to know each other. I said, you got to be fucking kidding me, man. You like fucking Trump? You're nuts, baby. And like, you know, but you know, guys like that, or someone like Mel Gibson. Look at Mel Gibson. He's another crazy conservative. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard, but then, you know, I have to respect Jane Fonda. Jane Fonda is still, to me, one of the great American actresses of the post-war period.
But the point is, her acting is separate from her politics. Let me just say some names. Let's say Adolphe Menjou, Humphrey Bogart, Clark Gable, Myrna Loy. Do you even know what their political positions are? No.
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Oh, you do. You do. Okay.
Of course, Adolphe Menjou. Look, that was something that, you know, Hollywood still makes a big deal about that. You know, the whole question of, I had a friend of mine who played in Lassie, whose father had been screwed by Adolphe Menjou during the blacklist period. So, and this guy was a child actor. He was in Lassie. He was in Leave It to Beaver, and you know his father was screwed. His father only recovered he basically had to become a theatrical actor. He was banned from Hollywood. And you know, so guys like that, I mean, you know, it's a sort of a mixed bag. I mean, you know, I wish people were more open-minded about it. I know that there are conservatives in Hollywood. There are conservative actors. There's a certain percentage of them. Look at the guy who did the series 24 Hours. That whole thing was done as a sort of
Very, very right wing, very right.
yeah, exactly.
But the program was right wing. I talked to the director on that, and you know, I said, "Aren't you embarrassed? Because I don't care what the plot is. You're promoting the concept, the reality of torture, that it works. That's what you're doing. I don't care who gets killed or what you say at the end of the program. You're showing people torture, and it works."
They were very upfront. I interviewed them for when I was interviewed them for radio at the time, for TV actually, and they were upfront saying, "Hey, we support the war on terror. We support the Patriot Act. We are doing a TV show to generate mass popular opinion to back those policies." And one has to see a whole bunch of product coming out after 9/11 in that spirit.
That's right. All of those sniper movies, you know, thank you for your service. You shot people in the back. You know? Oh, you got 50. That's great. You know, the snipers, all this adulation for snipers. It's amazing. But I mean, I want to cut the show up because we're going to do another one at 5:30. Spencer Tracy. He's obviously a liberal.
No, not necessarily. He was back and forth.
Okay.
But they asked Spencer Tracy, he was kind of in the middle. They asked him what he thought about actors getting involved in politics, and he said, "Just remember who shot Lincoln."
An actor, right?
And
okay. I'm going to wrap the show here. I'm just going to show, if I can get it up here, a picture of the cast of Hamilton, because Hamilton is multi-ethnic and is all playing the parts of white Anglos, white supremacists, founding fathers, you know, God bless them. There they are. So that's some of the crew. Okay, guys? So I'm gonna stop with that. And this is coming to the end of the Going Virus movie program, movie show.
One has to say that Miranda wrote that basically they gave him a room in the Jamel Mansion, which is up in Upper Manhattan, and that's where he wrote Hamilton.
Oh, okay. You had to write it somewhere. Okay, good. All right, guys. See you next week. And some of you will see you in about 25 minutes. And I've got a bunch of links from Alex. He sent them along. And so we got enough to talk about, that's for sure. So that's certainly do, right?